Okay, today we're on the range. We're going to be looking at and firing a Model 1843 North carbine. The Model 43 is the last in a series of carbines built at Harper's Ferry and under contract by Simeon North. The design is by John Hall, and again, the earliest carbines date from 1843 and run all the way to 1853 with a number of model changes and 3 different calibers. The carbines were initially made for the dragoons to use, but some were issued to the militia companies. Our Model 43, again, is the last in the series, and it is probably the most streamlined and the most efficient to use in that it does away with all the complex release mechanisms to open the receiver that the earlier Hall weapons experienced. It's also known as the side lever carbine because of this lever, and this is what opens the receiver. It works by simply pulling the lever slightly to the side and pushing down on it. It does not close the receiver. The receiver still has to be closed manually, like so. The Model 43 was produced from 1844 till 1853. Starting in 1848, they have the distinction of being the first U.S. military arm to have steel barrels. And you'll see on these models from 48 until the end of the run in February of 1853, the word steel, it's usually pretty worn away, is just beyond the sight right here. In all, 11,000 of these were produced. They cost the government $17.50 each when they were new. The original configuration of these guns was a 21-inch smoothbore 52 caliber barrel. The barrel and the metal parts were browned and then coated with brown tinted shellac. The receiver and hammer were case hardened. Things like the slide bar and ring and the cleaning rod were polished iron. All of them will have various inspector marks on the breech section and on the wood. In the case of this one on the shoulder here, it has the William A. Thornton stamp. So, the next thing about these guns, the ammunition. Originally, these carbines, all of them from 33 on to the end of the run here, used paper cartridges with a 75 grain powder charge and a 525 round ball for the 52 caliber guns, and accordingly for the other caliber guns. This particular North carbine is one of the famous Fremont guns, and we'll get to that in a second. So the original powder charge, as I described, 75 grains, 525 round ball, was the standard issue for these. These carbines, the Model 43 here, and some of the earlier 40 models were used in the war with Mexico, and all Hall weapons, carbines and rifles, were used in the Civil War. And as I mentioned earlier, this particular carbine is one of the carbines from the famous Fremont scandal in which the government was overcharged for these guns. There's a lot to it. In detail, you can read in excellent books on the subject. The Fremont carbines can be distinguished from other Model 43 Hall carbine, or Hall and North carbines, by actually three factors. One, they will all have dates from 1848 to 53, and that's because Fremont's agents selected the steel-barreled guns. The next thing, all the Fremont guns were rifled with 6 grooves, making 1 turn in 80 inches. The other thing, which is a bit of a confusion to arms historians and to people who study these guns technically, the Fremont guns had their receivers chambers bored out to 58 caliber, and this wasn't to take a 58 caliber bullet, it was to take a 58 caliber paper cartridge. The projectile still remained at 525 round ball, and we know this because we've studied existing cartridges and we can see this. Also of note, with Hall firearms, they did not lube the projectile. They went in pure lead, no lubrication on them. And again, we know this from studying surviving cartridges. Now, in modern times, we're not going to fire this with the regulation service load. It's just too much stress to put on the stocks. The metal parts would probably take it, but the stocks of these guns, in many cases, in the case of this one especially, have been restored. They're fragile, but they can be fired within reason. After working with Hall rifles and carbines for many years now, I found that a variance of 35 to 45 grains of 2 or 3 up, that doesn't seem to matter so much, will allow these guns to be fired safely with low recoil and yet get good accuracy even out to 100 yards. So for our demonstration today, we're going to be using modern neoprene loading tubes like they use in the NSSA. part of the reason I do that is just I shoot the gun enough, it just isn't practical to keep making paper cartridges. And also it gives you a chance to see what it would be like to handle the cartridge without having to go through all the work. So in operation, to work these guns, the first step is to bring the gun to pretty close to a vertical position, open the chamber, draw a cartridge, and again, this is what I mean by modern loading tubes. Take a ball out of the cartridge. Sometimes they stick a little bit. Charge the cartridge into the chamber. Put the ball in, and you'll notice one of the things about Fremont guns that is an issue, the ball actually does not fit securely in the chamber. It has a little bit of play in it, so if the gun isn't fired almost instantly, powder could start to leak around the ball. We suspect that they might have packed some of the cartridge paper in there to keep it tight. But either way, once the powder is in and the ball is in place, and you'll see the ball is almost near the height of the edge of the receiver. That's where you want it to be. Once it's in place, the receiver is closed. Cap. And just as a kind of an interesting thing, when these guns were produced, percussion caps were new. The Hall and North carbines were the first U.S. military weapon to use percussion caps. Back in the day, they called these primer caps. We now call them percussion caps. So, cap goes on the cone. The gun is brought to full cock. And give me a second to take an aim here. Now, upon firing, half cock, take the hot cap off of it, open the chamber, let it cool off. Draw another cartridge, charge it with powder, ball, close, with our primer cap, full cock. Open, draw another cartridge, powder, ball, close, cap. So you can see these actually work pretty good. They do leak a lot of gases. So you can see everywhere around here, you see my fingers from the gases coming around and out the trigger, around the trigger. Gases leak out back here. But they do work well. They're a well-made gun. The parts are truly interchangeable. And again, Fremont's men didn't particularly like these guns, but they carried them through the war. We don't see any records of them turning them in for better guns such as Sharps or Burnsides. So we know that they saw service through the whole war, despite all these issues and the messiness of using them. So I hope that will give you some insight as to what it's like to handle a Hall type rifle or carbine, and what they shoot like. They're actually very accurate guns depending on the skill of the shooter, of course. So I hope you found this informative and interesting, and I thank you for taking time to view our post.